want to talk now about climate change. It's going to impact us all, but some places are more vulnerable than others. And according to a new study, affordable housing is at risk. We're joined now by Benjamin Strauss, CEO and Chief Scientist at Climate Central. He is one of the co-authors of that report titled Sea Level Rise and Coastal Flooding Threaten Affordable Housing. So Benjamin, this report is, at least for me, pretty worrying. You and I were chatting in the break about climate change. For those who haven't yet read this report, how worried should we be going forward?
Well, this report focuses on a very a fairly narrow group, which is people in affordable housing and their risk. So the numbers actually aren't huge, but the concern is that the people who live in those homes that are in at-risk areas, they're really the most vulnerable. They have the fewest resources to know what's coming, prepare for it, respond to the floods they experience, and recover from them.
So I know that this report essentially says that this is because of flooding, because of the rising sea levels that we have, which obviously means that some areas just geographically are going to be more at risk than others. Per your report, really what cities are some of the most at risk right now?
Yeah, the cities with the largest numbers of people living in affordable housing that's threatened are places like Boston and New York and Atlantic City, actually. New Jersey has a lot of cities, Atlantic City, Camden, other places at a pretty high level of risk. And then you can go down to Norfolk and Portsmouth. A lot of places in the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast in particular seem to have this combination of low-lying land near the shore where affordable housing has been developed.
Do you see this putting a huge stress on the system, right? Because obviously this means that folks are going to be displaced, right? If there's flooding in their areas, they're going to have to flee to somewhere. So how much pressure do you see climate change, the rising sea levels, of exerting on the existing systems and structures that we currently have?
Well, I am worried about that kind of pressure. I think in this case, we may eventually see some displacement, but my fear for the earlier stages at least is rather that people become trapped. Because if you're living in affordable housing, which is already scarce, right? There's not nearly enough of it to serve the people who need it. It's going to be hard to move out because you're going to have a hard time finding someplace else to live. So that means you stay put, and the flood doesn't mean your home is destroyed, but it does mean you might get black mold growing in the basement, which is a health risk. You might have your appliances destroyed, which you can't afford, or you have to move them up to the second floor, things like that. And you basically become trapped, and you're in a situation where the landlord may not be interested in making all the repairs that you'd normally make, especially if flooding becomes chronic. And that's one of the things we find is that in a fraction of these places, by the middle of the century, there will be 2, 3, 4 times a year when certain homes will be at risk of flooding.
Benjamin, what's the case here then for folks who don't live in affordable housing, who don't live on the coasts? Frankly, to care. I mean, to put it bluntly, I hear what you're saying. I know it makes a lot of sense to me. Climate change is something that I personally am concerned about. But for those who, are really kind of ignoring it right now, it's not really impacting them. They're listening to this and they're saying, why should I care, about someone in affordable housing? I'm in great housing, or I'm living in the middle of the country right now. This doesn't bother me. What is that case then for them to really pay attention?
Well, this study was about affordable housing and coastal floods, but there are climate threats that affect people in every zip code in this country. I mean, you have the fires burning up in the West, which have been increasing decade by decade with temperatures. Heat waves are the biggest natural killer in this country, except now they're juiced up on the steroids of climate change. The big downpours we've been seeing, storms in Iowa and other places, blowing down the whole year's worth of crops, or flooding crops at the wrong time and destroying the yield. So, whether you're a farmer in the Midwest or you live in the Rocky Mountains or California or along the coast, and a lot of places in between, it was a record year for hurricanes. And then add on to that, the fact is that the solutions to climate change, to building a green economy, a clean economy, those can provide economic benefits. There are a lot of jobs to be had there. It's local American energy. There's just a lot of benefit to be had from the solution. Even if we didn't have a problem, it would actually be, I think, to most people's advantage and to the national advantage to shift our energy system towards these clean energy sources. So I think people have two sets of reasons to care about climate change. One is that the solutions can benefit them, and the other is, there are climate impacts today and worsening climate impacts tomorrow, no matter where you.
Well, strong arguments there. Benjamin Strauss, CEO and chief scientist at Climate Central, again, one of the co-authors of that report titled Sea Level Rise and Coastal Flooding Threaten Affordable Housing. So everyone should definitely check that report out. Thank you so much for joining us.